Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. So for our next guest, he is actually a personal friend of mine, very good friend, Shawn Soulless Jones. Shawn Jones is a longtime activist and member of the Libertarian Party leadership on the state and local level. He is a single father and small business owner. Shawn is self-educated and has committed his adult life to trying to wake people up to liberty and shine light on those areas others may not know exist. May the road rise with you and your enemies be far behind. Welcome, Shawn.
Hello. Ooh, that is glare. All right, that's better.
Waiting for
hello.
to load. He is going to be talking about jury nullification, and we have had lots of conversations on this topic, and I am very excited to get to chat with my good friend Shawn.
All right, super excited to be here. Always happy to be able to tell people about jury nullification. And hopefully the goal really of jury nullification at this point in our society is to help keep people from being locked in cages, particularly for victimless crimes, which is, I think, at this point, probably the most useful tool we have against an overreaching government state. Geez, not even sure where to begin. I started with, I'll start with, jury nullification. And one of the reasons it's important to me, in my quick bio there, I mentioned my adult life that I've spent in pursuit of liberty. There was a long time where I was, an overgrown juvenile delinquent, and lived a life where many of my friends were in and out of the penal system. And the overwhelming majority of them were mostly for drug-related victimless crimes. So from a personal experience, life experience, and my community, I've seen and watched young men, particularly, and young women be railroaded to the plea bargain system, and typically get intimidated by what is lovingly known as the trial tax, where people are. It is insinuated and sometimes directly told by even your defense attorney that if you choose to take this to trial, the likelihood of your penalty is going to be exponentially greater. They're literally the judge, the prosecutor, and in many cases, the defense attorney, sadly enough, as well, are working in a triangle power structure to keep the system operating as it currently does, with as little resistance as possible and as much obedience to the law, regardless of the merit and the morality or the ethics of the law itself. And where I wasn't I wasn't hugely aware of a lot of the history of jury nullification. And so I've taken this opportunity as well to dig a little bit deeper into my research. Somebody's at the front door. Sounds like
sorry, that was my phone.
And I was watching an interesting case all the way back from the War of 1812, which is, I guess, what we acknowledge as the first recorded case of jury nullification in this country. And throughout the 1800s, 19th century, jury nullification was a much more widely accepted practice, and it was something that much more that the average juror, in this case, a lot of farmers in local rural communities, they were judging their peers, and so they had the ability to judge their peer from a much more personal level, whereas now we draw jury pools that have really a lot of times no connection with whoever is being tried for whatever it is. And so also when you don't have somewhat of a personal and emotional connection with somebody, I think it makes it easier to blindly apply laws. One of the bigger, more relevant court cases that happened back in 1895, Sparf versus the US, basically declares that while judges, the Supreme Court, acknowledge the power and the right of the jury to nullify the law, nullify and judge the law itself. the ruling also states that the judge does not have to tell the jurors that this is an option. So the judicial system at this point has really just been rigged to make sure that the juror remains ignorant. And as we know, ignorance I'm going to butcher the 1984 line on this. Ignorance is knowledge, or something to that effect. And so as I've gotten more into jury nullification, I've spent a lot of time in front of some of the local courthouses, Collin County and Dallas County in particular, because that's my area. And I noticed two very different reactions when I'm out passing out, one of these fantastic brochures. And depending on what climate is going on in the country also depends on what kind of information that I'm passing out. After a school shooting, you do not pass out Second Amendment flyers. It's just one of those. Unfortunately, you're gonna trigger some people and turn them off of the greater concept of the information that you're giving them. So we stand out in front of courthouses and simply are passing out informationals. That's it. Generally, you will get harassed by government officials saying you're not allowed to petition or you're not allowed to protest on the government steps. Well, we're doing neither one of those things. I'm not petitioning anything and I'm not protesting anything. I'm simply educating jurors on the power that they actually have. It also, for those that want a shortcut out of jury duty, I let them know, just tell the prosecutor that you're aware of jury nullification and you'll be out in 5 minutes. While I would like people to do their jury duty, I'm also not, I also don't want people on a jury that don't want to be there, because, well, then it can go wrong in a couple of different ways, or they're more inclined to just toe the line, get out as soon as possible. And so that generally means that they are going to go by the judge's instructions. The judge is going to tell the potential jurors and the jurors, this is the law. Your only job is to determine guilt and innocence of the law. This is a bold-faced lie. This is, and going back to SPARF 1895, the judge is allowed to mislead and somewhat intimidate the jurors into thinking their only responsibility is to judge whether somebody's guilt or innocence based on the facts. The reality is that this is probably our last power as citizens to stop a lot of these immoral laws. And the more people you can get to come to the conscientious acquittal decision, the more likely cities and municipalities are going to stop charging these crimes. If they can't get convictions and they can't make the money off of it, they're going to stop doing it. Some of the more famous things that you will talk about that come up with the positive is going to be the fugitive slave laws. After the Dred Scott case, and I believe that's 1852, but it's somewhere early 1850s, I believe. The Dred Scott case, where a man was forced to return a runaway slave as quote unquote property. Well, as the slave abolition movement was growing, more and more people are not in support of it. So it became almost impossible to convict people for the fugitive slave laws. Then you get into alcohol prohibition. Neighbors didn't want to convict their neighbors of alcohol because the odds are they may be drinking with their neighbors. They're drinking in the same speakeasy. They're buying from the same moonshiner. And they don't want to convict somebody because it could easily be them that was in that situation as well. Even there's a fantastic jury story where the jury box asked to see the evidence, which was the bottle of alcohol in question. The jurors passed the bottle around, consumed the entire bottle, and in essence, they got rid of the evidence for the person on trial. And so
it's like the best jury nullification ever.
Because there was no longer. Yes. nobody's, I don't think anybody has passed out a joint in a case yet. But I would certainly like to sit on that. I would like to sit on that. Yes. And on those lines, jury nullification when it comes to marijuana convictions is probably, I think, the most common advocacy avenue right now, because I think even if you're not a cannabis user, you smoked one in high school, you had friends that did, you may have friends that have medical conditions that use it. And so as cannabis has grown back to being a normal part of society, it's a really good way to apply this law. And can't remember his actual name, but he goes by New Jersey Weed Man. And he actually represented himself and was allowed to talk about jury nullification in court, which is it's a very dangerous and slippery slope to bring up nullification. And his belief, and the belief that he was allowed to get away with it, was he was representing himself. And so he was able to look at his peers in the jury box and present himself as the actual victim instead of the criminal. And because of that, he was able to get 7 out of 12 jurors to acquit him. The state of New Jersey was so angry about this that they actually retried him. I'm not sure how they were able to get away with double jeopardy, but they were. And even better, the second go around, instead of 7 jurors acquitting him, all 12 did.
Wow. Did they try to just say it was a mistrial? You know, that maybe they charged him with contempt or something at the end?
No, they acquitted him because it was 7 out of 12 jurors found him not guilty. And I'm sure he had bought the cannabis across state lines. So I'm sure from that aspect, the amount that he had crossing state lines, I'm sure they were able to repackage a new set of, charges with him without it being the actual, without actually being the quote unquote same criminal case. And so that's some of the more modern stuff that has happened in New Orleans a few years back. Man was busted. I think it was only about an ounce of weed. They literally couldn't field a jury. They had so many people. They ran through everybody that day that came in as a potential juror. They couldn't find enough people that would actually be willing to even convict anybody of marijuana. So they just simply dropped the case. So there's a great deal of power in being able to resist the system through the jury. But there are some pitfalls that people have to get around if they want to be on the jury. And, where 15 years ago, the last thing I would have wanted to do is jury duty. I'll get into how we're screwed on the compensation of that in a minute. But, I never wanted to because I thought it was a huge waste of time. Now, God, I want to be on juries so bad. But I want to, do I have other more lucrative things to do with my time? Certainly, most of us do. But how often do you get to keep a nonviolent criminal out of a cage? What better good use of your time than to literally be able to help a human being stay free, especially when they didn't hurt anybody. But if you want to be on a jury trial these days, one, absolutely do not mention anything about knowing about nullification. Odds are they're not going to bring it up, but you certainly do not want to just play dumb, short, simple answers. Generally, you want to address pretty generic and mainstream. Look as kind of average citizen as you possibly can. Again, keep your answers short. Do not mention anything about jury nullification whatsoever. And don't insinuate that you would be unwilling to not adhere to the law. And by doing this, they're going to ask you if you are willing to uphold the law as it is. You can say with 100% honesty, yes, you are, because the law says as a juror, you have the right to nullify that bad law. Now, that is obviously not what the prosecutor and the defense are asking you, or that's not the intent of what they're asking you. But when they ask the question, you are not lying. So you can say with 100% honesty and integrity, I will uphold the law to the best of my understanding. And you can do that, have a clean conscience. Also, something important to know, you cannot be punished for your decision as a juror. So whether anybody else agrees with it or not is irrelevant. You cannot be punished on the back end for doing the right thing. Now, you may get resistance inside the jury pool. You're going to have people that are going to want to just go home to their family. People that are going to give you the standard, but he broke the law. We all know, and if you're watching this stream, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're pretty aware of, the shenanigans and fuckery that are going on in this country through the legal system and outside of it. So it does take a certain amount of mental fortitude at times to resist that intimidation. That's, again, it's going to come from the prosecutor, it's going to come from the judge, and it may come from your peers in that jury box. But again, we're back to talking about a human being's life, and even from a taxation is theft, fiscal responsibility perspective, would you, in clean conscience, feel good that your money was being taken to convict somebody of this crime? Like, is this a service you feel you would pay as a citizen? Is this a criminal that you feel so compelled needs to be off the streets that you would reach into your wallet and you would take out money in order to keep them caged? I think when you look at it from that perspective, a whole lot more people would move to the nullifying of the law. I also really like the term conscientious acquittal. I think that's I just think it's a really nice and accurate way to say it, because you're voting with your conscience as a juror, and again, we're going back to, a lot of these people are men and women that have children. They have families to feed. They have loved ones to take care of, elders, youngers, whatever the case may be. And so are you going to feel good, about, either locking them in a cage, making them jump through hoops and pee in a cup every month for the next 3 to 5 years, and are you willing to pay for that? I think most of us, as just regular citizens, when we take the bullshit and the politics and the emotional appeals out of it, I think most of us genuinely don't feel particularly good about most of the people being incarcerated, what they're being incarcerated for. I don't know. Thoughts? Anybody? Questions?
Well, have you, since you're at the courthouse a lot, have you had any interaction with people that you encountered before they went into the jury pool, made the jury, and then you just so happened to run into them again and they used your knowledge? Has that happened?
I have not, and I would say mostly, jury selection is really only, the neat things about doing this kind of activism is it literally, it's 1 hour a week. Monday mornings, at least in Collin County, is going to be your jury selection day. So I'm really there from, in the case of Collin, they're a little later, so I'm there from about 8 to 8:45 in the morning. That's really it. My commute back and forth to the courthouse is longer than the actual time that I spend in the courthouse. And it's an interesting social experiment of how people respond to what I'm saying. Like, hey, I'm just here letting you know your rights as a juror. One of the things I hear a lot is, oh, I know my rights. Yeah, no, you don't. You don't, because your rights are being hidden from you. Civics class has been removed from the public education system. As these court cases say, while it is still a perfectly valid form of your use of your civil power, it is not taught in our system. It is not encouraged. And in fact, you are intimidated into not exercising your rights. I think most of us that have been in the liberty community for, more than 5 minutes know that in most cases we're walking around amongst a bunch of people that feel like they know, but they really don't. They've been fed a very specific line of thought that is controlled by the hierarchy of a federal government. And the government has no interest in giving us the knowledge and power to actually be able to resist them. In a corporation, the boss doesn't give you the keys to the kingdom, thinking that you may be able to mimic his system, leave him, and take his business. That would be bad business management. And the government is in the business of controlling people. And so they are not going to give us the resources and the education to be able to fight back with them, unless we fight for that knowledge.
Yeah, I remember being in government. Government class. I want to say my freshman year in high school. And yes, it was public school because, again, rural. There's no choices, and it's homeschool or that. And my parents both worked full time, and one of them worked out of state like all the time. So that just wasn't an option. And I remember doing government class, and I remember through jury nullification, but it was just like a vocabulary word. And you had to memorize the definition of jury nullification one time to get through a test, and then you never talked about it again. I do remember that, but I remember that because I was in debate, and so I had to do further reading and study on a lot of the laws to further my arguments that I was having to make. So I felt like I got a little bit more information, which helped, my liberty career. But it's kind of frustrating because I've actually sat on a grand jury before. I have not sat on a jury trial before. Haven't done that. Haven't been called for one. I've only ever been called for grand jury, and one time, and I got on, which was a very strange feeling for me because, again, I'm rural Northeast Texas. I'm loud and proud being libertarian with liberty views, and the judge knows me. And when I got in there, I was like, I'm going to be here 10 minutes, and then I'm out the door. Like, I want to get on. It's not going to happen. And he has this little questionnaire that he had everybody fill out. And it was just, what excuse would you have? Why couldn't you serve on the grand jury? And then he goes through the people he calls through the people he wants to talk, have maybe another question or two in person. And he calls me up, and I'm like, okay, he's about to tell me to get the fuck out of here. And I get up to the bench, and he's like, Miss Prather, I know your views. Can you be unbiased? And I said, I'm very principled. I hold my principles to a very high standard, and so I'm full of integrity. That's the answer I can give you. And he goes, okay, go sit back down. And I'm like, all right. And then he calls my name. I was actually the first one on the name that he called for grand jury, and I served on grand jury for 6 months. Now it's totally different. There is no jury nullification in grand jury, but you can heavily influence before somebody goes to trial. And I tried, and there was a few people I was actually able to change the minds of the grand jury on whether that person should have charges brought up. And that felt really good. And it made an impact. About a year later, when I ran for city council, there were people who were like, no, she's amazing. She knows what she's talking about. She convinced me of all of these things and taught me these things while I served on grand jury with her. And they ended up going out and voting for me and supporting me. And I thought to me, that was a lot. But then I also had a lot of experience with the people who were just set in their ways. And most of the things that we saw in rural Northeast Texas is a lot of drug offenses that we're coming across, repeat drug offenders, because you're talking about felonies, you're not talking about misdemeanors that go through grand jury. And it was just, these people were like, oh, they've been in and out, and they should be away forever, and it was really difficult to get them to understand that this is a person who has been hurting, and there is nobody else was hurt they are hurting. So it's a victimless crime, and they should not have their lives thrown away, for hurting and trying to, do what they know on how to stop hurting. And so that was my experience with grand jury. Jury trial is different. I definitely would love, that would be a bucket list thing for me. I don't know if it's going to happen where I live. I'd have to probably move in order to get on a jury trial. But anyway.
Jury system is closed right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, it is.
I'm trying to figure out what they're doing with some of those right now, but I haven't.
Well, it's sad to think of the people who are stuck in jail awaiting, and they're innocent. They're not guilty, but they're innocent because, you're innocent until proven guilty, but they're stuck in a cell. And you're like, what the hell? But that's sad to think about. So how can jury nullification go wrong?
Well, and I'll go with some of the more annoying argument. I mean, because it can happen, and I guess most of those are even antiquated as well. But there was a period of time where lynch mobs were popular in certain regions of the country, and a jury may decide at that time to nullify the lynch mob, based on their own racial bias. So it can, it has the potential. Anything with power is going to be a double-edged sword, So that being said, you have to be mindful that it can work both ways. I think that the good exponentially outweighs the bad. And I have somebody who's in my local libertarian community in Collin County, and that's generally that is one of his things that he cites. I would argue that the amount of people that were let go being nullified for the Runaway Slave Act or the alcohol prohibition exponentially outweigh the occasional person that probably got away from doing something truly rotten. But it can happen. It is, with any time you empower people with knowledge, there's always going to be a few that are going to misuse that. That if maybe they're just a contrarian dick. I don't know. Yeah. Typically those kind of people aren't going to spend a lot of time, I wouldn't think that those type of people, or let me rephrase this. You would have to be a special kind of malicious a-hole to want to invest that much time to be put on a jury, to sit through the jury just to let a criminal go for shits and giggles. Like, I mean, I'm sure that sociopath is out there where, they're everywhere. But it doesn't negate the fact that the power of the jury to help alleviate victimless crimes and nullify bad laws, again, exponentially outweighs the what if potential bad boogeyman. Right now we're living in the what if boogeyman world. If you don't wear a mask, why do you want to kill grandma? We're always living in these hypothetical fears instead of the hope of noble truths, and so for me, jury nullification is a way to put that noble truth out there because, and I'll say I ran for Congress in 2018 down in South and East Dallas. And so I was on a candidate tour, and I ended up in particularly a couple of events that were primarily Democrat leaning, and I was running only against a Democrat, and that Eddie Bernice Johnson has been there since like my junior year of high school, and I'm 45. She's mentally ill, but either way, so I'm at an event where I believe the he's now current DA John Crusoe was running against Faith Hill, and I was talking to John, and he was aware of some of me and my friends' work on jury nullification, And so I always, anytime I was getting in front of judges, attorneys, I'm always asking about nullification, because I'm fascinated by the collusion that goes on along amongst all of them to really make sure that the jurors stay dumb. And I asked him about this, and I got the, typical but infuriating answer. Shawn, here's what it was. Shawn, if everybody wanted a jury trial, we'd have to build too many courthouses because they'd all be full. And I said, well, John, how about we just stop arresting people for victimless crimes and we keep the court systems made for real criminals? Well, Shawn, you know what to do if you don't like a law. You need to go to your legislator and take it up with them. It's a fucking answer. It's Howard's answer to the end. It shows no integrity and no principle and no willingness to stand up for what is right, what is true, and what is ethical. It was, he kicked the can down the line. And we all know I simply don't have enough money to buy a legislator. I don't. And most of my friends don't either.
Even if we pulled our money together, it's still not enough.
No, because we don't have the economic stroke to continue to funnel that. I could buy them off for maybe one term, maybe a semester.
And you go in debt in the process. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
even then, like the odds of you actually changing the law, even if you buy that legislator for one session, you have to buy multiple ones. And even then, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to change that law. It's absolutely rigged.
And right now we are competing with, going back to like cannabis in the state of Texas. And I know a lot of really great, really enthusiastic cannabis activists in this state. What most of them fail to realize when they keep saying, we're close, we're close, we're close, we're not close. Because Texas has about a third or 40% of all the private prisons in the United States. Okay. Those private prisons were built and signed with contracts with the state of Texas. We have occupancy clauses in those. Okay. So it means that if the state doesn't keep a prison at a certain level of occupancy, fantastic dehumanizing way. It's like they're tenants, they're, occupancy. Then the state has to pay millions of dollars in fines for compensation. The fact is, right now, as long as those contracts are in play, it still costs the state more money to not fill those beds than the money that they can make off of legalization. And so while the overwhelming majority, even if 75% of the state of Texas wanted legal cannabis right now and all wrote their legislature, it's not going to make a damn bit of difference because of the financial repercussions of those contracts with private prisons. That being said, as a libertarian, I am not opposed to a private prison system. In some aspects, it would have to run more like a 1960s healthcare system where it's essentially nonprofit, where you have a board and people are paid to operate it, but it's not a publicly traded entity. But that being said, that is why, I believe that cannabis is still way further away in the state of Texas than most people feel, because most people judge it on what their peers think. And most people really, they just don't care about weed. They may not smoke it. They may not even be a big fan of it, may not like the smell of it, may have never partaken in it, may think it's an unhealthy habit. But most of them don't want to cage a 19-year-old kid for having a dime bag of weed. It's asinine. It's a waste of resources. And that legal lobby is so powerful and has so much money that, again, to buy off one legislature, maybe that's one thing. Find one or two legislatures that do actually have a moral compass. You're going to find those out there. But the amount of money that a company like Muckrock has in the private prison stroke in Texas, we could pool all the money of all the libertarians in the state of Texas, still couldn't buy one. still couldn't compete with that lobby, because it's a long-term futures bet. And I would imagine that most of those politicians that do that, somewhere in their stock portfolio, they are being incentivized and profiting off of that. Although I'm, not that that's legal or anything, but when has the law ever stopped a politician?
Yeah.
So
Lining pockets when you're supposed to be a public servant and a voice of the people, that's, people have to take ethics into consideration. And that's one of the things that's sorely lacking in our society right now is ethics and integrity. So when I was on grand jury, and I know this is going to happen at trial juries, DWIs and other substances that are illegal, we'll just stick with the state of Texas because you and I are both familiar with those laws and familiar with what happened, especially the climate of how everybody thinks on that. Even though it's a victimless crime, most of the time, right, until somebody gets hurt. What is your thought? What are your thoughts? What is your advice on people who struggle with the idea when it comes to like driving while intoxicated or driving stoned, that kind of, DUIs, DWIs?
Well, yeah, and I as a practicing anarchist voluntarist myself, I have, I've done a few podcasts, and it's the boogeyman anarchist question is, drinking and driving. The reality is that if you didn't damage anybody's property or anybody's person, it's a victimless crime. That being said, I have been sober for almost 20 years. I have lost people on every side of the equation. The one that was driving, the passenger, the innocent sober person that was hit by the drunk driver. I've had friends that I met through AA. I had one that knew a guy who actually backed over his daughter while drinking, killed her. She was like 4 years old on her big wheel, backed out behind her. So I am acutely aware of how bad it can go wrong.
Yes, I agree. I've told you my story. My ex-husband, 3 DWIs. I was with him through all of them, and he didn't hurt anybody. He didn't destroy anybody's property. In fact, 2 of the 3 issues he had gotten pulled over were actually like, taillights. And he was coming home from work, and he had 1 beer with believe it or not, my dad, before they, right after they got off work, before they drove home. And it was just like, I've dealt with that, and I've dealt with the thought of, what if he hurt somebody? I struggled with that a lot. But it's, like you said, it's still a victimless crime. But it's that weight, I think, carries heavy with the people who make those bad decisions.
It does. And obviously we live in a culture that has grown. DWIs have become very, very profitable for all states involved, all states. I had one back in 1999, I believe. My father even had one, a similar story. He had like 2 beers after work. He lived in North Carolina. They had one of those police blocks on the state highway, 6:30 in the evening, just doing random breathalyzer tests. He'd had 2 beers. Man weighs like 200 pounds. Wasn't even close to a buzz. But they were doing commie road stops, and he got hit with one. I would say as a potential juror, for me, I would look at the repetition of offenses and the circumstances in which it all went down. If he's got a 0.08 blood alcohol and he got popped because he didn't put his turn signal on, yeah, I'm acquitting him. I'm letting him go because he wasn't harming anybody. If he passed out behind the wheel at a red light and slowly rolled through it, I'm going to have to look at that differently, especially if it was, say, his 3rd offense. I've got to take that into consideration. That being said, to be principally consistent and truly believe in the no victim, no crime, I believe there actually has to be an injured party, and the state and the government are not a person. They cannot be an injured party. In fact, all the state does is profit from these situations. And so while it's extremely uncomfortable to say that I would let them go, the truth is I would. And again, I don't like it. I have lost a lot of people in my life to it. I understand how truly dangerous and damaging alcoholism can be to the entire family. I was also a product of one of those types of families. So again, experiencing it from all parts of the equation, that still doesn't change my ethical commitment to make sure that that people committing victimless crimes stop being terrorized. My thought is as well that when I say this, I like people to understand that in my world, in my form of justice, and what it would look like in a libertarian judicial system, is right now we have a punitive system. The state can punish people regardless of whether the victim is made whole. I believe we need to get back to a restorative justice system. If you drink and drive and you damage somebody's property, you damn well owe them for that property and compensation and inconvenience for it, whether that be their house, their car, their physical person. Right now, those people generally aren't made whole. If you get hit by a drunk driver and they've got the state minimum $50,000 worth of coverage, that's all you're getting. Last time I got in a car wreck, both times that I've gotten in a car wreck in the last 15 years, I maxed, and neither one of them were DWI cases, but in both cases, I used up the entire $50,000 in medical costs, and my back and my neck still are not the same. I wasn't made whole. And so in these cases where, say, that person had been drinking and driving, and I used the $50,000 for my medical, I'm still not made whole. Well, now the guy who hit me, he's in freaking jail. So my tax dollars are now paying to put a guy in prison who damaged me. My back is messed up. I'm still out of a car. I've lost work. I'm in recurring pain, and I'm paying to not get paid back. And oh, by the way, the state's making about $50,000 a year off of him.
Then they want to turn around and say, you should thank us. You should thank us for making it right. Like they put that pressure on you to kind of like forgive and forget, and they're making a whole bunch of money. You're still out everything. And they're like, we want you to thank us. We've done such a service for you. It's such a farce.
It is. It's the illusion of safety. That's and then always the battle cry for the children. What about the children? Do you really want people drinking and driving going 40 through school zones?
Of course not.
And again, a lot of these bizarre arguments that I get are, we need these laws because apparently most of us as human beings only don't do things because of laws. Like, literally, apparently people think that on a Tuesday I would be out raping if there wasn't a law that said I couldn't. Like, the absurd logic that I would be running down the street, smoking crack naked, and going on like a rape fest. And the only reason I don't do it on a Tuesday is because there's a law against it.
Yeah. And it's frustrating because a lot of people have forgotten the fact that with liberty comes responsibility. And I didn't quote that entirely from Spider-Man, but people forget that if you have liberty, you have an individual responsibility to make sure you are a functioning, contributing member to society, and that is your responsibility. And you will get punished if you do not hold yourself responsible, and in the process, you damage somebody else or somebody's property. And, we need to teach that again, that people need to be more responsible for themselves and their actions and their decisions.
Yeah, being self-sufficient and responsible is a lot of damn work, and that's we have created a culture and a society that accepts the mediocrity and says, "Don't worry about it. Your neighbors will take care of you." And it's really hard when we've basically called the society into this and I hate to use the word soft because it sounds so lamely alpha male, like you're soft, but we have soft from the fact that people have deferred more and more responsibility and more power to government agencies and tax entities. And so people are having less and less accountability for their own poor behavior. And, and it just continues to snowball further and further to the point where eventually we are going to be living in idiocracy, where people literally, they don't understand that Brawndo doesn't feed the plants.
Yeah, they cannot think for themselves. They don't question, the propaganda. They just go with what they're told.
Yeah, and even and it truly does. It reminds me. I mean, we are living in truly the 1984 society, and even with our current situation. In 1984, the war continues to bounce between two different continents, and the people can never really keep track of who they're at war with, but they just continually accept whomever they're at war with. And right now, I mean, we are at that. I can't tell you what country we're at war with anymore, and I sure as hell can't tell you why we're at war with whatever country we're at, because literally they have paraphrased the exact same story my entire life. I'm just old enough to where I had friends that were participating in the first Gulf War. My parents' generation is the Vietnam generation. And so I don't understand how people don't notice that it's basically the same propaganda being used over and over and over again, and much in the jury system with the way we are manipulating jurors into punishing these victimless crimes. A war on alcohol, a war on drugs, a war on this, and using that word war, it stokes a certain emotional response in people, and then they can puff their chest proudly as they're helping wage against that war that we're all fighting. With little attention to the details and the morality of said war. And going back to the nullification is the greatest thing about the nullification. You only need one. All I need is one of those 12 people to break through a little nugget, and hopefully even the people that don't get selected, when they read the brochure, it drops a little food for thought. Like there's some really, some of the literature is really good on self-ownership, and owning your own body, which is something that in our society more and more today, people have relinquished more and more control over their body. I read some rumors about talking about a forced Rona vaccine, the idea that's being spit out.
Yeah. So Shawn, we've got like a minute or two left, and this is so important. And I know you've already touched on this, but it's so important. I really want you to, just reiterate this. Can you give us your advice again on how to get picked for jury duty? Because we know a lot of people who are watching, they're liberty-minded. They do want to actually sit on a jury if they have the time and to make a change. So what can we do to get picked for jury duty?
Dress average when you walk in there. That's, not too fancy, not too low end. And just think as basic and sheeple as you can. Do not mention anything about jury nullification. That is an absolute disqualifier. So keep your answers in general short, simple, Okay, don't give them anything that's going to open them up to further question. And when they ask you, are you willing to apply the law? Absolutely, you can say with 100% honesty, integrity, yes, you will, because the law says that you have the right to nullify and to judge not only the criminal or the defendant, but the law itself.
Yeah.
So, and when you do get selected, if you do get selected, do not mention nullification to the other jurors, because if you engage in one of these conversations, you do not know whether they're going to go back and tell the court system, and then there's either going to be a mistrial or you're going to be thrown out of there. So keep it simple and concise. Play dumb and average as best you can. And if you get picked, do not succumb to the peer pressure, because I'm not saying you will, but there is a good chance that you will meet some resistance if you buck what everybody else wants you to do. The intimidation potentially can come from the prosecutor, from the judge, or from your 11 other peers. So know that by you being there and doing the right thing, that you're standing on the ethical high ground, and your ability to save a young man or woman's life from being destroyed in the future is an enormous responsibility, but it's one hell of a privilege to be able to do, and one of the greatest things we can do to serve our communities.
Thank you so much, Shawn.
If you would like more information, go to fija.org. That's the Fully Informed Jury Association, or go to juryhero.com. And they've got a lot of great information. You can order flyers. If you want to reach out to me through Facebook or any other social media, Shawn Soulless Jones, I will be happy to help get you started. If you would like to start taking on some courthouses in whatever location you have, as soon as they start drawing juries again.
Thank you so much, Shawn. I love you, man. You and I are going to definitely get together soon, and I miss you. And thank you so much for joining us at Taxationist Death Fest. All right, up next we have, we've got Cal Molinet, and so stay tuned. If you want the full schedule, you go to titfest.org. Thank you, and we'll be back.